Bonjour tout le monde.
Good afternoon, good day to all of you. Very, very happy to see this large turnout for the last session prior to the closing session. I guess this shows your interest in our favorite region, which is Central Africa, and also for Cameroon and Gabon. Without any further ado, I'm going to ask our distinguished guests, beginning with the Prime Minister of Gabon, to join me on the stage, Mr. Bilie. And His Excellency Prime Minister of Cameroon, Mr. Joseph John Ngute. We are only given 30 minutes. I'm sure you have a lot of questions on your mind. So let me get on with the Prime Minister of Gabon. You have been developing the plan to fast-track transformation. A couple of years ago, we were opportune to support you in this regard. Where do we stand today with the implementation of this plan? It's an ongoing plan. Thank you for the question. Plans fall in line with the specific context. This one came to withstand the crisis. We have all been hit by the health crisis, which was turned into an economic crisis, and we have tried to wrap up everything by introducing a new economic strengthening process. And today we stand at 3% of growth while working on the CEMAC zone to meet the conversion criteria, which brings us together in this region. So we want to start with infrastructures first, to reorganize and restructure, and also to boost them. This includes the road infrastructure with the expectation to bring to a higher level our import capacity. And you have mentioned your support as well in this area, in the area of mining and the timber sector, which brings a very great contribution to our economy. And we have also made some changes in the service area, because growth has to be inclusive and should also serve the needs of populations by creating jobs, and also should go a long way to improve the health services through a training plan. Lots of premiums were put in there, and we want to come up with a human resource that is up to the needs. And all of this is made possible by the support of the President Ali Banco to come up with an economy that is diversified and also prosperous. And on top of this, we have also added a development approach organized around 3 areas. Patriotism, you need to love your country and continent, and also pragmatism, to come up with a solution that will be as close as possible to what is achievable, do what we can with the few we have. And also we have proximity, which is very close to populations, and this is made possible via the private sector initiatives. And all this are in the tune of 3,000 million CFA. And the private sector was expected to raise 2/3 of such resources, and also be able to capture international supports via PPPs. On that last leg, the results were not as expected, because when we were signing the MOUs, the PPPs, the time between the signing and the coming to fruition was too long. And we thought it was important to continue with the PPPs and try to reshape them and see how we can shorten the application period towards achieving our objectives. Thanks, Excellency. You have discussed the challenges we've been hit, that have hit the country since the COVID-19 period. So what do you think is needed to fast-track that growth? A number of things. First of all, we have to continue with investments in the infrastructures because this is where the most will be made. Government has to step up, and there's a need for more funding as well. And funding is becoming very scarce when it comes to the loan by the government. So there's a need to keep infrastructure investment going and also investment in the education area and training because there's no genuine development without training. And we also have to ignite the private sector because it's expected to drive growth, create wealth by creating jobs needed, so much needed by the youth. And there's a need for more partnerships as well. We have to locate a potential source for growth and also diversify everything. And we have a three-area approach which builds on good governance and a transitional economy towards the green and blue economy. And we also have to come up with an inclusive growth that promotes gender equality, and we are on the way.
Your Excellency, let's turn to you because many people here just attended the Invest in Cameroon session and hopefully got really excited about coming to the country. The country's experienced about 4% growth. I think you mentioned that as well in your speech. So same question, what would it take to really accelerate it in a context where, as we know, population grows at 2.7% across the continent? What will it take to really accelerate growth in Cameroon?
Well, first of all, let me say that what the Prime Minister of Gabonese Prime Minister said, some of which you'll have an echo in what I say, because of course we come from the same zone, the CEMAC zone, and so many of the problems that Gabon faces, we also face. And I remember in 2016, we had a real crisis where we had our foreign exchange reserves were very low. And President Paul Biya invited his brothers and colleagues to Yaoundé. They met, and they took some very major decisions with the aim to reducing certain unwanted expenditure, creating the relevant fiscal space to be able to plow this money in investments. And it is within this context that we in Cameroon, under the Ministry of Economy, we started thinking about the new 10 years plan. And so we did look at the 2030 National Development Strategy. Now, that strategy is built on a number of pillars. One is industrialization, which we need to industrialize and provide for ourselves the kinds of things which we're importing. The second is to improve on our agribusiness and cocoa in particular, coffee, rubber, banana, all of those commodities which bring in ready hard currency. For example, banana. I mean, it brings in, not only does it bring in hard currency, but it's also another important sector where people can get employment. So we have this strategy which we've been unrolling. One of the major things we've done, and which is proving to be very positive, is to increase our power network. It was an important deficiency, and since for the past 10 years, we've invested 1,700 billion CFA just in power. The latest venture is the Nachtigal Power, and which is going to bring in 450 mega. We are also working on the Kikot, which is going to bring in between 500 and 550 mega. So that was a missing link because 60% of our industrialists were running their own generating plants. And of course, you know how heavy fuel can be expensive. And so it fits into the pricing system. And so now that we're getting this sufficiency in energy, even the industrialist can get into the network, and it can bring in more industrialists to come and work with us. That is one very important lever which we've tried to use to ensure that our growth rate goes faster. Of course, I mentioned also the agro-industry sector, which is a very useful one for us, cocoa in particular, which is a huge hard currency earner, improving on the seeds, improving on the logistics concerning that, which means, of course, improving on the road infrastructure, the ports infrastructure, and we've also, in this area of ports, put in a lot of money. The Douala port, which is carrying out about 70% of our external trade, the Kribi deep sea port, and now we are working on the Limbe deep sea port. At the same time, working on the road infrastructure, because we believe that once the Yaoundé-Douala road would be done, and eventually the Yaoundé-Douala-Ngaoundé-N'Djamena rail link would be done, it will facilitate trade and it will take our GDP much, much higher.
Thank you, Excellency. And I think both of you have spoken about the what, right? What needs to be done, the sectors, the transformation. From our work, we will believe the how is even as important, if not more important. So I'd love to talk a bit about what needs to be in place from a governance perspective, from a delivery perspective, to actually make sure this happens.
Yes, if I may. In unrolling this, we rely a lot on the private sector, obviously. The private sector is the key mover. They are the ones who are going to carry out most of this work. And one of the things we have been doing, and I think the president of GICAM made it clear, we've been working under my supervision with the Cameroon Business Forum to ensure that all the issues that plague the full enhancement of the private sector are sorted out. Of course, there are myriad issues which the private sector brings on the table, that especially dealing with the legal framework, dealing with the judicial process, dealing with many other issues. We have platforms, not just one, but many platforms which deal with these issues. For example, when things concern the economy per se, we have the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Economy, the Minister of Trade, and the others who meet and under the supervision, obviously, of the Prime Minister and take a number of relevant decisions. So we have a number of platforms, but the overall platform, of course, is the Cameroon Business Forum, where the private sector and the public sector meet yearly. Of course, we had 2 years during which meeting was not easy because of COVID, but we are going to resume meeting. But having said that, when the president of GICAM has any issues, he can come directly to my office and I can liaise with line ministers and we can sort it out. In terms of overall coordination, it is the Prime Minister, head of government, who is responsible, who ensures that all the ministries are aligned with the objectives that we've set for ourselves. Of course, the direct line ministry concerned is the Ministry of Economy, but we work in tandem to ensure that all the other ministries are following up and they are doing exactly what they have to do. Obviously, all of this under the supervision of the President of the Republic.
Excellence, qu'en est-il au Gabon si on regarde?
How about the situation in Gabon in the light of the 345 companies with a turnover of 1.1 and upwards of 1 billions. So when we consider what is there, what do you think is to be done to go a bit further? I think we have a responsibility that is at 3 levels. First, that of the government to do what it takes to have a common strategy and come up with economic communities that are functional or operational, because the issue of the market size is still holding. Because when you have a country of more than 2 million inhabitants, you cannot think this will be a place where we can have a small market that would be enough to attract 1 billion investment from outside. You need to tackle other markets such as the sub-regional market. And on this side, we want to place the emphasis on infrastructures, when the minister mentioned roads being built in Cameroon with connecting to Chad and Congo. So we believe there's need to connect to Central Africa to make trade easier. And this is where you can get more contracts and increase the traction. And we also have the continental aspects and the AFCTA. It's very important for us because it's something that will help to get an integrated area. I mean, the African continental trade area. It will help us to attack the African markets. And on top of that, there's also the funding. Funding is a problem because most of our businesses find it hard to get funding on the regional or domestic markets due to high interest rates, and reimbursement period is very short, and they cannot really display a certain level of competitiveness without having any debt. And the debt in Europe is, I mean, the loan in Europe is with low interest, so it doesn't make possible competition in the light of the current context. So we want to do what it takes to work out the difficulties. And next comes the selection of sectors to be prioritized. And I'm not talking about nationalism, but patriotism, to make for businesses to secure contracts, and that will get market shares that are also reserved for them. This is what we are doing under the mine and the forestry reforms, where we have introduced the quota of 30% minimum of market share for the national or domestic businesses. This is where we can generate the champions that we have been supporting so far to grow further.
Thank you. I would like to see you discuss sub-regional importance, because what we have seen in Second Africa is more competition among countries. We wonder if it won't be fair if some countries can decide to promote a specific product for the region while the other will also focus on other. What is your take on this approach? This debate is as long as Central Africa. It started with institutions that started the issue of integration and so on. And indeed, it would have been much more fair to think this way. However, only the market can regulate things. The market will indicate the quality of a product. When we offer the same on the market, the difference lies in quality. We need to offer some quality products. Yes, indeed, as part of a better integrated Africa, we could choose this option, a refinery in Douala or Yaoundé, and industry for cement in Douala, in Libreville, and also with the issue of transport, the supply chains that will delay the supply deadlines. So it will be easier from Libreville to Franceville. So we need to fix all these problems related to transport and also communication. It is a problem that we need to address because it is critical all over the continent.
Relationship with the private sector in Cameroon, and we heard about it, we read about it, even in Jeune Afrique, about some of the tensions between the public and the private sector. How's that going today? Have those tensions been resolved?
Well, there was at one point to talk about a dichotomy between public and private. I think we have gone beyond that dichotomy. We are now talking about the complementarity between the private and the public sectors. One must do with the other. They are not mutually exclusive. So those tensions are natural tensions that occur in human enterprise. Obviously, the business leaders want to pay less taxes. Obviously, the state requires more revenue to meet certain expenditures. I'll give you an example. I mean, we know countries where there's been a breakdown of law and order. For any businessman to protect his investment, much he will pay if he were told to pay a bit more taxes in order to cover that and get security. He would rather do that than take that security on upon himself. So those tensions exist, and I talk to the private sector people all the time that we have to reconcile. We need the private sector to make profits, because without profits, they will fold up and they will lose jobs. So it is in government's interest to ensure that the private sector flourishes. And that is why all these mechanisms which we had prior to this meeting have been put in place. We are also, like others, trying to create champions that have a turnover of over $1 billion. For the time being, we had 3. One of them has dropped because of a natural disaster. The Sonara had an untoward incident and lost its productive architecture. But we have the National Hydrocarbons, and we have the Société Anonyme de Brasserie du Cameroun. They are over 1 billion. We think that we have about 5 to 10 other companies that can join that club. And we are going to work with the ministry. And indeed, we have a platform right now where we're working with the Ministry of Economy, with a number of civil society institutions, such as universities, in order to define those categories of companies that we can promote for them to get to that level. We are looking at companies that have a huge impact on our balance of payments. That's very important. We don't want to spend as much hard currency. So if there are companies that can bring in revenue or make us spend less revenue, hard currency, I beg your pardon, those are the kinds of companies. We're looking for companies that have a technological input that can lift the company, because many of these very big companies that have this turnover, if you look at them, you'll realize that their main difference is in technology. They leverage technology, and that is one area where most of our economies in our sub-region, and I dare say in many other African countries, are lacking in this innovative technology. So those are the kinds of things which we're looking at, and we're working very closely with the GICAM and other employers' unions to ensure that there is harmony between the private and the public sectors.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Et peut-être on a parlé des pays du Gabon.
We talked about Cameroon and Gabon. Let us take a more general perspective. There is still a gap between the CEMAC countries compared to OMO states, UMOA states. As part of a report that was issued yesterday, you will see that the 8 countries of the UMOA zone experienced a growth above 4%. But for CEMAC, it is the only one, Cameroon, which experienced a growth over this level. So why this gap at the regional level, and what should be done in order to fill this gap? I think that there are various factors, and it can take hours and days to discuss this issue. The very first one is about the concern, the difference in the structure of our economies. As you indicated, intra-trade is well developed, and we have some very strong pillars. For Gabon, until we achieve the level that is expected by the head of state for the diversity of the economy, our market is still 10 to exports and subject to all the different disruption, because when you sell your oil not to Cameroon, not to Cote d'Ivoire, to Nigeria, and manganese is not sold to Chad and so on. So it is external one, and the structure expose us to all the different foreign shocks. This is why we start to start anew every time. This is the first difference. The second one is known. We need to make effort in our different sub-region in order to build some strong infrastructure from one country to another, making movement easy. And this is what is a reality in West Africa, and there should be a diversification of our economy in order to move to the increase of the potential that we can trade among states. Until we have some commodities to exchange, because we receive some product from Cameroon, but this is not enough. And as we said it this morning, we import 80% of what we consume. We need to drop this to 50%, but we should be able to export. So it is the economic structure that makes the difference. And if we deepen this, you will see the population factor. There are elements to be considered from a different perspective when we consider the per capita income. There are different indicators, and they at the expense of Central African states concerning the access to market and also external funding, whereas in some West African states have a lower per capita income because this does not rely on these commodities that are exported. So, in fact, these are the blocking factors that present a real hindrance for the growth of Central African states.
Yeah, I think, as I said, you'll get an echo from me because the Gabonese Prime Minister said a lot of things that are relevant in this case. But I just want to say that this situation, if you take a snapshot, yes, it's the case. But I think if we're going to go in the next 5, 10 years, you might find certain differences. Things might change. I'll give you a number of examples. Today, we in Cameroon, we have a lot of industries that utilize, I'll give you an example, palm oil, which we produce. But our production is not enough now to satisfy our national demand. And we're getting palm oil now exclusively from Gabon because they have excess production. So the same applies in the extractive industry. We have in the Balam oil iron fields, which straddles over to Congo. It's probably the biggest in the world, subject to confirmation by the experts. And the problem there was, how do we get these minerals, this iron ore, from there for Cameroon to Kribi, and for Congo to Pointe Noire? And the two heads have come together and said, no, we can't do this, so we must consider these fields as one, and it's easier to get the iron ore to Kribi port. And so Congo and Cameroon will both exploit this iron ore and bring it to the Kribi port for export. Now, this is going to generate huge dividends for both countries. And we'll have to do that in many other areas. Having said that, what my brother here said is absolutely correct. We need to put more resources in the infrastructure because the ECOWAS region are in advance as per us because of the fluidity of transport in those areas. And of course, Anybody who talks about trade, especially external trade, talks about transportation. That's what carries external trade. So we believe that that is the case. But we also think that sometimes the agencies that look at us always expect a lot more from Central Africa. That is our belief. More than they expect from other countries. Whether it's because we are an oil-rich region, I don't know. But we have that feeling that sometimes comparatively, when we do even more, we get less acknowledgement from what we do. It's not to criticize anybody, but it's just what do you call it? An aside. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Unfortunately, we're actually out of time, so I will just ask each of you we're actually at the end of the forum. I would love a final word from each of you, any message you have to the participants here and towards those watching us online. Maybe we'll start with you, Your Excellency.
Well, as I said, we came here to sell the label Cameroon. We hope that we've been able to entice you to visit, or at least to get in touch with us. We have here in Côte d'Ivoire a permanent mission. We have an ambassador here for those who are here. But, you know, we are open. We are open for business. And we have been criticized in Cameroon as being inward looking. And that is not the case. We want to stretch out. We want to invite businesses, partners, especially on PPP or BOT basis. And of course, there are areas, for example, provision of water, healthcare, where the state has to put in money. And we are prepared to do that. We have the leverage to do that. So I want to thank everybody who has been here to listen to us and who's taken an interest in our country, and we're expecting to see you anytime. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Excellency. Excellence, votre dernier mot.
What is your final words, Your Excellency? I would like to commend the organizers of this meeting for the opportunity given to us to talk about our country. It is a perfect platform. We are here for the third time, but some have been taking part since long. But beyond the meeting, it is all about having some partnership. As the Prime Minister from Cameroon said, we are not in competition. We need the private sector to take its share. If there is no private sector to support us in order to support the risk that the state cannot take, because the state has to focus on infrastructure, education, health, all that relate to the social aspect of life. This is a great platform. Thank you for this afternoon that we spent together to discuss some key topics for our countries. We will be back. Gabon is still open. We are still working with Cameroon in order to improve exports and also the trade between our country. We need to go further so that within 5 or 10 years, the question that you ask will no longer be relevant. And you hope that I won't have the opportunity to ask a question in 5 years or 10 years' time. Thank you all for your presence.